I spent most of my life proving people wrong, but I never thought I'd have to prove it to my own family. When I became a father at 24, folks said a young man like me had no business raising a baby alone. They said I wouldn't last a month. They laughed behind my back, waited for me to give up, expected me to hand her off to someone more fit. Instead, I gave that little girl every piece of my heart. I raised her through nights so long I forgot the sound of my own breathing. And for a while, it all paid off. She grew into a strong, beautiful woman who made me proud every single day. But life has a way of turning on you when you least expect it. The same child I fought the world to raise grew up and handed my grandchild to people who wanted me gone. And the way they pushed me out, it brought back every old wound I thought I'd already survived. I was only 24 when the world decided I wouldn't make it as a father. Folks in my hometown didn't say it to my face, not usually. But they said it in their tone, in their looks, in the long pauses before they tried to congratulate me. And they said it even louder when my daughter's mother walked out 3 months after she was born, leaving a note on the kitchen table and a silence that swallowed the whole house. I won't pretend I didn't sit there for a long while, staring at that little piece of paper like it would explain itself. I read the same sentence over and over. I can't do this. I need time to find myself. But every time I lifted my eyes from the note, I'd see the crib across the room, and the tiny girl inside it who didn't ask for any of this. She'd look up at me with those big brown eyes like I was the only thing she recognized in the whole world. And maybe I was. That night, I made a promise I didn't fully understand yet. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't come from money. I lived in a small rented house at the edge of a blue-collar Indiana town where life was simple, predictable, and rough around the edges. I worked long shifts at a machine shop that never truly got warm in the winter and never cooled down in the summer. By the time my shift ended, my clothes smelled like oil and metal, and my hands shook from hours of holding tools that vibrated right into my bones. But every day, I'd unlock that front door, drop my lunchbox, and pick her up before doing anything else. She'd smile like she'd been waiting all day just for that moment. That smile, somehow it erased everything I carried home with me. People didn't understand how a young man like me could take care of a baby. They'd look at me funny at the grocery store, whisper in the cereal aisle, tilt their heads like I was a puzzle they were trying to solve. Some would ask, "Where's her mom?" Others said, "You must have your hands full," like it was a miracle I hadn't dropped her on the sidewalk. One woman at the laundromat looked at me, then at my daughter, then back at me again. She said, "Are you babysitting for someone?" I remember adjusting the blanket around my daughter and saying, "No. She's mine." The look she gave me wasn't unkind, just surprised, like she'd spotted a rare animal out of place. But the truth was, it wasn't the strangers who worried me. It was my own family. My mother, God bless her, tried to help in all the ways she knew how. She'd show up with casseroles and fold my laundry without asking and gently hint that maybe my daughter should spend more weekends at her house so I could rest. She meant well, but she didn't understand that every hour with my daughter felt like something I didn't want to miss. My brother wasn't gentle at all. He'd shake his head and say, "Man, this is too much. Let mom take the baby. Go live your life." But what he didn't understand was this was my life. Raising her wasn't something I did because I had to. I did it because when I looked at her, I saw the one thing in this world that needed me for real, the one thing I couldn't walk away from. Those early years were the toughest I've ever lived through. I learned everything the hard way. The first time she got a fever, I panicked so badly I drove straight to the ER without even putting on socks. And the nurse there, after checking the baby and assuring me she was fine, smiled softly and said, "You're doing good, Dad." I carried those 4 words inside me for years like they were written in stone. By the time she was 3, we were a team, just me and her figuring life out as we went along. I took her everywhere I could. To the pond with the ducks. To the county fair where she pointed at every animal like she discovered them herself. Even grocery shopping felt special when she held onto my shirt and pointed at the fruit she wanted. I'd come home from work, exhausted to the bone, and she'd run to me yelling, "Daddy's home." Like my arrival was the best part of her whole day. And maybe it was. But I know one thing for sure, it was the best part of mine. When she turned 4, something changed. Not in a bad way, just in a way that made me look at her differently. She started asking deeper questions. Started remembering things. Started noticing when I was tired or sad or quiet. One night, I sat on the couch with my head in my hands, thinking about bills and work and everything weighing on me. She climbed into my lap, put her small hand on my cheek, and said, "Daddy, don't be sad." That was the moment I realized she wasn't just my responsibility. She was my companion in a world that often felt too heavy. But kids grow. And growing means changing. By the time she reached middle school, I could feel the distance inching its way between us, not because she didn't love me, but because she was learning who she was outside of me. Friends became more important. School activities filled her afternoons. She became more independent, more confident, more curious about everything beyond our little home. The first time she asked me to drop her off down the street instead of right at the school entrance, she said it so politely I almost missed the meaning behind the words. "I just don't want my friends to see you walking me in, Dad. I'm not a little kid." I smiled and said, "All right." But that quiet pinch in my chest stayed with me all day. Adolescence didn't hit her hard. She was a good kid, smart and steady, but it made me realize something I didn't want to face. I had spent her entire life being her whole world, and now she was discovering one where I wasn't the center anymore. And that's where this chapter of my story sits, right at the edge of her childhood, where my little girl was still sweet and close, but already taking her first steps into a future where I wasn't sure how tightly I fit anymore. I used to stand in the kitchen doorway and watch her do homework at the table. Her hair tied back, her pencil tapping, her brow furrowed like the whole world depended on getting each answer right. She didn't need me hovering. She didn't even notice I was there most nights. But I stayed anyway, leaning on the doorway, just taking in the sight of her growing up right in front of me. It's a funny thing, watching your child grow. You feel this twist inside you that's part pride, part fear, part gratitude you can't explain. I'd think to myself, I did this. I raised this small, smart, capable human. And at the same time, I'd think, she's leaving me a little more every day. By the time she turned 13, she didn't hold my hand anymore when we crossed the street. She didn't ask me to sit with her while she brushed her teeth or needed me to fix her hair before school. Instead, she would walk past me, grab her backpack, toss a rushed "Bye, Dad," over her shoulder, and run out the door like the world was calling her name. And it probably was. She made friends easily. Teachers loved her. She had this gentle but determined spirit that drew people in. I saw it every time she walked out of school with a group of kids around her, laughing, trading secrets, sharing teenage dreams. She was becoming her own person, and she was doing it fast. I'd pick her up after practice sometimes, watching her walk toward the truck, her ponytail swinging, her cheeks flushed from running. She'd climb in, toss her bag onto the back seat, and start talking about everything that happened that day. Who said what, who got in trouble, who had a crush on who. I'd listen, nodding, smiling, taking in every sound of her voice like it was something I needed to store away for later. But even in those happy moments, I felt that slow drift. Not a push, not a rejection, just distance, like the tide pulling back from the shore. One evening, when she was around 14, I walked past her room and heard her on the phone. Her voice had changed, softer, more mature somehow, like she was practicing a version of herself she wanted the world to see. I stood there for a moment, listening to her laugh, realizing it wasn't the little girl giggle I grew up with. It was different. Older. Stronger. And without really meaning to, I started thinking, she's not my little girl anymore. I felt guilty for feeling that way. But I think a lot of parents go through it. That shift where you go from being the center of your child's world to being the anchor they return to only when they need grounding. She still loved me. I never doubted that. But the way she loved me changed. It wasn't the clingy, all-consuming love of a child. It was the respectful, appreciative, sometimes impatient love of a teenager who wanted to stretch her wings without cutting the string. And slowly, I let her. I let her make friends I didn't know well. I let her join clubs that took her out of the house more often. I let her stay late at school events even when I was tired from work and wanted nothing more than to have dinner together. Because even though it hurt sometimes, I knew she needed space to grow. Still, there were moments that caught me off guard. Simple moments that stung more than they should have. Like the day she asked if she could spend Christmas Eve at her friend's house. She said it so casually, like she didn't know that Christmas Eve was our tradition. I remember standing there at the kitchen counter, holding a roll of wrapping paper, trying to keep my voice steady when I said, "If that's what you want, sweetheart." She hesitated, just for a second, and gave me a quick hug before running off. That hug was supposed to reassure me, but all it did was confirm what I already knew. My world was still centered around her, but hers wasn't centered around me anymore. Years kept moving, and she kept changing. More makeup, more independence, more dreams about a future far beyond our small, quiet town. She started talking about college, about wanting to major in business or communications, about internships and big cities and places that didn't smell like machine oil and cornfields after rain. I'd sit at the table and nod, smiling like I wasn't scared. Like I wasn't wondering what my life would look like without her in it every day. She was 17 when she told me she'd been accepted to a school 2 hours away. Not too far, but far enough that I wouldn't hear her footsteps in the hallway each morning or see her sitting at the kitchen table after school. Far enough that holidays and weekends would be the only times we'd share meals. She told me with tears in her eyes, saying she didn't want me to feel left behind. I hugged her tight, told her no matter where she went, she'd always have a home with me. But deep down, I knew we were standing at a crossroads. The world was opening for her, and closing behind me in ways I didn't fully understand. On move-in day, I carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, pretending the weight in my chest wasn't heavier than anything in my hands. She decorated her dorm room with pictures and lights and little things that made it hers. When she hugged me goodbye, she held on longer than I expected. Her voice wavered when she said, "Love you, Dad." I held on to that moment like a lifeline during all the days that followed. Because after she left, the house got quiet. Too quiet. No music from her room. No late-night kitchen raids. No laughter coming down the hallway. Just me, and the echoes of a life that had been full only because she was in it. I tried to stay busy. Worked extra hours. Cleaned the house more often than it needed. Went fishing alone sometimes. But no matter what I did, I felt like something important had slipped out of my hands. Not lost, just drifting. And that's the thing about raising a child alone. You pour everything into them, your time, your heart, your whole life, because you want them to have more than you ever did. And then one day, they walk out into the world with all that love you gave them, while you stand at the doorway wondering what you're supposed to do with your empty hands. Still, I held on to hope that even as she grew and drifted and explored, our connection would carry us through the years. That no matter how far she went, she'd always find her way back to me. But life has a way of proving you wrong at the exact moment you think you're standing on steady ground. And that quiet distance I felt in her teenage years, well, it would grow into something much bigger, something I didn't see coming until it was too late. When my daughter left for college, the house didn't just get quiet. It felt like someone had turned the volume all the way down on my life. I remember standing in the doorway after dropping her off, staring at the empty hallway, feeling that strange mix of pride and loneliness settle deep inside me. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like the echo of something that used to be loud and warm and familiar. At first, she called often. Almost every night. She'd talk about her classes and the people she met and how one professor reminded her of someone from back home. I'd sit in my old recliner, listening to her talk while the TV played quietly in the background, pretending she was right there on the couch like she used to be. But little by little, those calls started spreading out. Instead of every night, it became every few nights. Then once a week. Then once in a while. I told myself it was normal. College kids get busy. They make friends, join clubs, find new interests. I told myself I wanted her to live a full life, a life she wasn't afraid to step into. But every time the phone didn't ring, a part of me wondered if she still needed me the same way I needed her. When she came home for holidays, she was different. Not in a bad way. Just older. More polished. More aware of the world outside our small Indiana town. She talked about job fairs, internships, leadership programs. Things I never had access to, things I never had the chance to dream about. I loved hearing about her growth, but sometimes I felt like I was learning about a stranger who carried pieces of the girl I raised, but wasn't her anymore. One summer she came home with a young man she wanted me to meet. His name was Aaron. Clean haircut. Firm handshake. One of those smiles that looks practiced but polite. He dressed nicer than most men in our town. Even his posture screamed good upbringing. I understood right away why she liked him. He was steady, confident, ambitious in a quiet, controlled way. They'd met in one of her business classes. Group project. Coffee afterward. The kind of story you expect young people to tell when they think they've found something good. I shook his hand, tried to be warm, tried not to look as nervous as I felt. Because this was the first real sign that my daughter's life was moving in a direction where I couldn't follow. I watched them from the kitchen window that evening as they sat on the porch steps laughing at something on her phone. She leaned into him in a way she never leaned into me anymore. It hit me harder than I thought it would. Not because I felt replaced, but because I realized that every parent eventually reaches a moment where their child chooses someone else to build their future with, and you have to smile and accept it, even if your heart hasn't caught up yet. The next few months went fast. She talked about him more often. She spent holidays splitting time, an hour with me, 3 hours with his family. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the father who held her back or made her choose. But inside, I felt that tide shifting again. A little stronger this time. A little further each month. Then came the moment that changed everything. The day she sat across from me at the diner with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, eyes shining in a way I recognized from her childhood. "Dad," she said, "he asked me to marry him." She looked at me with that same expression she had when she was 5 and wanted me to be proud of the picture she drew. Except this time, she wasn't asking for praise. She was asking for my blessing. I forced a smile. Not because I wasn't happy for her. I was. Truly. But because the little tug inside me, the one that had been building for years, pulled harder than ever. I said all the right things. Told her how proud I was. Told her I trusted her judgment. Told her I'd be there for whatever she needed. And I meant it. Even if part of me felt like something was ending. The wedding planning started almost immediately after that. But something felt off. Not with her. With everything around her. His family was involved in every detail. The venue. The dress. The colors. The food. The guest list. I offered suggestions here and there, but most of them were brushed off with polite smiles. His mother had a way of making me feel like I was interrupting something. Like the grown-ups were talking and I was the extra chair no one wanted to move but didn't want to trip over either. I didn't complain. Didn't push. I didn't want to ruin anything. But deep down, I could feel myself being gently, quietly, carefully, moved out of the circle. Not pushed. Just repositioned. Like furniture. The day of the wedding, I stood there holding my daughter's arm, feeling her tremble slightly. She was nervous. Excited, yes. But nervous. I whispered, "It's okay. I'm right here." For a second, she leaned into me the way she used to when she was little. And in that moment, I felt like I mattered again. But after I walked her down the aisle, that moment passed. His family surrounded her after the ceremony, hugging her, kissing her cheeks, taking photos, telling her how perfect everything was. I stood off to the side with a plate of food I didn't eat, watching her laugh, watching her slowly weave herself into a world where my place seemed smaller and smaller. His mother approached me at one point, placed a hand on my arm, and said with that same tight, overly warm smile, "You did a wonderful job raising her. We'll take it from here." Take it from here. Like I had been holding a position she was finally ready to step into. I didn't argue. Didn't correct her. Didn't say what I really felt. But inside, something cracked. And that little crack grew wider in the months that followed. Quietly, naturally, like something breaking under its own weight. After the wedding, I kept telling myself things would settle down. I told myself she just needed time to adjust to married life, to figure out how to balance her new world with the old one we built together. I tried to believe that once the excitement faded, she'd come around more often, call a little more, stop by on weekends the way she used to. But it didn't happen that way. Her visits became shorter. Her calls became quicker. Her life, piece by piece, began to orbit around her husband and his family. I remember the first time I realized things had truly shifted. It was a Sunday afternoon. I called to ask if she wanted to grab lunch. Something simple. Just the two of us. She hesitated in that careful way people do when they're trying not to hurt you. "Dad," she said softly, "we already made plans with his parents. Maybe next time." Maybe next time. Those words started showing up often, like a polite curtain closing between us. I didn't want to be the father who guilt-tripped his daughter into spending time with him. So I played it cool. I told her to enjoy herself, to have fun, to send me pictures. I hung up the phone and sat there in the quiet house, listening to the clock tick loud enough to fill the room. The next time I saw her was a month later, for a quick dinner. She talked about their new apartment, their new routines, their weekend get-togethers with his family. She told stories about his parents, inside jokes, shared hobbies, family traditions they invited her into. I nodded and smiled, even though each story felt like a tiny reminder that she no longer needed me the way she once did. I tried to stay grateful for the time we did have. Tried not to feel that sting in my chest every time she checked her phone, or when she cut conversations short because we have to be up early tomorrow. I told myself she was happy, and that was what mattered. But deep down, I could feel that the bond we once had, the bond built through long nights, shared meals, whispered promises, was stretching thin. One night, about a year into her marriage, she called me with a kind of excitement I hadn't heard in a long time. The moment I heard her voice, I sat up straighter. "Dad," she said, "I have news." My heart jumped in my chest. "What's going on, sweetheart?" There was a pause, a soft, trembling kind of pause, and then she said it. "I'm pregnant." For the first time in months, everything inside me lit up. A grandbaby. A new life. A second chance to feel needed again. I congratulated her so quickly she laughed. I asked questions, how she was feeling, if she'd been to the doctor, when the due date was. She talked, and I soaked up every word. For a moment, it felt like we were back where we used to be, just a father and daughter sharing a piece of life bigger than both of us. But almost immediately, her world closed back in around her, and I realized I wasn't invited as fully as I hoped. His parents were at every doctor's appointment. They helped pick out nursery colors. They hosted the gender reveal. They planned the baby shower. I tried to help where I could. I bought a crib, solid wood, something I saved up for because I wanted to give my granddaughter something that would last. When I brought it over, his family was there. All smiles. All politeness. But I could feel something unspoken in the air, like I had stepped into a space that didn't quite have room for me. They thanked me, of course they did. But it was the kind of thank you that feels like a period instead of an invitation. Her mother-in-law touched the crib, smiled, and said, "Oh, how thoughtful. We actually ordered one already, but this will be good to have, somewhere." Somewhere. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I didn't ask. During the pregnancy, my daughter called me more often, but the calls always had a rushed tone, things to do, people to meet, errands to run. I could hear his mother in the background sometimes, giving instructions or asking questions, and my daughter would speak to her in a tone I didn't recognize. It wasn't disrespectful, just different, like she needed their approval more than mine. I kept telling myself not to read into things, not to assume the worst, not to let old insecurities crawl back into my chest. But it was hard, especially when I saw how close she'd grown to them. His father taught her how to grill steaks the right way. His mother showed her how to make their family Thanksgiving stuffing. They took her on weekend trips, bought her little gifts, called her every day. It wasn't that they treated her badly. It was that I didn't recognize myself in her life anymore. There were nights I sat on the couch holding my phone, wondering if she'd call, wondering if she even realized how far away she felt. I'd tell myself, she's busy. She's building a family. This is what grown children do. And that was true. But there's a difference between growing up and growing away. And she'd been drifting away for a long time. It just took me a while to admit it. Then came the day everything changed again. The day she gave birth. I got the call early in the morning. She said she was in labor and headed to the hospital. My heart nearly punched through my chest. I grabbed my keys, threw on my jacket, and drove faster than I had in 20 years. But when I arrived, his whole family was already there. Every single one of them. They filled the waiting room, talking, pacing, holding coffee cups. I stood off to the side, suddenly feeling like an intruder at my own bloodline's birth. Hours passed. People went in and out. Nurses came through the doors calling out names. And every time the door opened, I hoped they'd say mine. But they didn't. Not once. Not until the very end. When I finally walked into that room and saw my daughter holding her baby, my granddaughter, my knees almost gave out. She looked so small, so perfect, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. I reached out slowly, barely touching her tiny fingers. Her hand curled around mine, and for a moment, the whole world became quiet. In that moment, I felt hope again. A spark. A new beginning. A reason to believe our bond would grow stronger. But I didn't know then that this tiny hand would be the last connection I'd have for a long time. And that the same people who surrounded her cradle with smiles would be the ones standing between me and my granddaughter before I even knew what was happening. After my daughter got married, I kept telling myself things would settle into place. I told myself all the changes I felt, those subtle shifts in her voice, the way she leaned into her new life, the new routines that didn't include me, were just temporary. That every young couple goes through an adjustment period. That she would eventually find the balance between being a wife and still being my little girl. But the truth was, the moment she said I do, the ground under my feet shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. I noticed it first at family gatherings. Before the wedding, she'd always drift toward me, checking on me, whispering a joke, grabbing onto my arm, asking me if I was hungry. After the wedding, she drifted toward his family. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't cruel. She was just pulled by a gravitational force stronger than anything I could compete with. His family was everywhere. Every conversation. Every plan. Every decision. They weren't bad people. They were just everywhere. Loud, confident, always talking about what we should do. And somehow, without anyone saying it out loud, I slowly slid from the center of her life to the outer circle where people smile politely but don't ask your opinion. The strange thing is, it wasn't a single moment that pushed me to the sidelines. It was hundreds of tiny ones. A barbecue where everyone sits in a circle laughing, and a chair for you gets added at the end, not in the middle. A conversation about weekend plans where you find out you weren't included after everything is already booked. A birthday dinner where they hand out tasks, decorations, cooking, cake pickup, and somehow nothing is left for you to do except show up. His mother had a gentle way of taking control without looking controlling. She would smile kindly as she rearranged everything. And people let her, because she made it look natural. Smooth. Effortless. But underneath it all, she decided the shape of things. I remember one Sunday afternoon when I was invited to their place for a small get-together. I walked in holding a pan of roasted potatoes I'd made, something my daughter always loved. But before I could step fully inside, his mother met me with that polite smile she always wore. "Oh, you brought something," she said, glancing at the dish only briefly. "Well, we already planned the whole menu, but I'm sure we can find a spot for it on the side table." On the side table. Not the main table. Not the spread everyone would be talking about. Just some way, out of the way. I nodded and followed her inside, pretending not to feel the sting. I set my dish down. Nobody touched it the whole evening. Later, as people cleaned up, I noticed most of it was still there, untouched. My daughter walked past it without noticing, laughing, joking, locked in a conversation with his sister about nursery colors for someday down the road. Moments like that pile up in your chest. Quiet moments that most people would shrug off. But when you're the parent who raised a child alone, those small moments feel bigger than they look. I kept trying to ignore the imbalance. Kept telling myself not to read too deeply into things. Kept pretending I didn't feel the slow erosion happening inside me. One night, I got a call from my daughter asking if I could help them move some furniture into their new apartment. I didn't even let her finish the sentence. I grabbed my keys, threw on my jacket, and headed out. Helping her, being useful, being needed. It gave me a sense of purpose I'd been missing. When I got there, his whole family was already inside, lifting, organizing, unpacking. I paused at the doorway for a moment, holding a toolbox in my hand, feeling oddly like I was walking into a space where everyone already had a role except me. His father clapped me on the back with a friendly smile. "We're almost done here. Just putting in the shelves now." Almost done. I'd rushed out the door hoping to feel needed, only to find everything already handled. My daughter came over and hugged me, but even her hug felt rushed. She was juggling conversations, answering questions, directing furniture placement. I told myself not to take it personally. But it's hard not to notice that you're becoming someone who arrives after the work is finished. As months passed, I saw less and less of her. And when I did see her, she always seemed to be carrying stories from someone else's home. New traditions, new routines, new ways of doing things that came straight from his family's world. It wasn't that she forgot where she came from. It was that she was learning a new language, and I didn't speak it. Then came the evening that changed everything. The moment she told me I was going to be a grandfather. I still remember how she said it, her voice shaking just a little, like she was holding a fragile secret she was finally ready to share. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm pregnant." For a moment, everything inside me lit up, every doubt, every ache, every quiet fear washed out by the overwhelming joy that rushed in. I can't even describe the way it felt. Like someone handed me back a piece of my heart I thought I had lost. I hugged her tighter than I had in years. She laughed, cried, wiped her eyes, and said she wanted me to be part of everything. But promises made in moments of joy don't always survive the weight of everyday life. Because even before the baby was born, I felt the shift. Doctor's appointments? His parents went. Nursery decisions? His mother handled them. Baby names? His family gave suggestions, loud ones, and my daughter circled their choices before mine. I kept quiet, kept hoping things would balance out, kept believing that once the baby arrived, her heart would circle back to me. But every day, it felt like I was becoming more of a spectator in a life I used to build with my bare hands. And as her belly grew, so did a quiet fear inside me. A fear that everything I fought for all those years, every long night, every sacrifice, every moment I raised her alone, would get rewritten by people who hadn't been there for a single step of the journey. I didn't know it then, but stepping aside wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing that the further she grew into her new world, the smaller my place became. And that shrinking space, that quiet little corner she left for me, is where I waited for the baby who would change everything. I thought the day my granddaughter was born would be one of those moments you look back on when you're old and say, "That's when everything changed for the better." And in a way, it did change, just not in the way I hoped. I still remember the car ride to the hospital. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I kept checking the clock every few minutes like time would move faster if I stared at it hard enough. I must have driven 10 miles under the speed limit and 10 miles over it, switching back and forth because I was too excited and too nervous to keep steady. When I walked into that hospital room and saw her, my daughter, tired but glowing, holding that tiny bundle wrapped in pink, I felt something inside me crack open. It wasn't pain. It was something else, like every sleepless night I'd spent raising her. Every fear, every hope, every sacrifice I made suddenly made sense in one single, breath-stealing moment. I looked at that baby and felt a wave of love I didn't even know I had left in me. She looked so small, so delicate. Her little hand curled around my finger like she'd been waiting for me. And for a second, just a second, it felt like God handed me a second chance at fatherhood. Not to redo the past, but to pass forward everything I didn't have time or wisdom to give the first time around. But that moment ended quickly. Too quickly. Because while I was standing there, still holding onto her tiny fingers, the room started filling with people. His family. His parents. His sister. His cousin. His aunt. They came in like a warm, cheerful wave, all smiles, all congratulations, all claiming space around the mother and the baby. I stepped back because there wasn't enough room to stand close anymore. Nobody asked me to move, but everyone else stepped forward, and naturally, I became part of the background. I told myself it was all right, that it was normal, that they were excited too. But I felt the shift. The same shift I'd felt since the wedding, but sharper now. His mother immediately took charge of everything, asking questions, directing the nurses, deciding who held the baby next. My daughter, exhausted and overwhelmed, just nodded along to whatever she said. And there was a moment, a small one, barely noticeable, where I saw my daughter look at me with this apologetic softness in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but I knew what she meant. "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know how to balance this anymore." I stood quietly, watching his family take photos, watching them pass the baby from one pair of arms to the next. I waited for my turn again, but somehow, it never came. Not that night, anyway. When visiting hours ended, I kissed my daughter on the forehead, whispered that I was proud of her, and walked out of that hospital room feeling like I had left something behind that I wasn't sure I'd get back. The days that followed should have brought us closer. You'd think a new baby would make everyone softer, gentler, more grateful for family. But that wasn't how things went. His mother became the self-appointed manager of the entire newborn schedule. She posted charts on the fridge, planned visiting hours, made rules about feeding times, nap times, diaper changes, bath schedules, everything. And my daughter, still healing, still learning, leaned on her heavily. I tried to be understanding. I really did. She was a first-time mom. She felt overwhelmed. They lived closer to his parents, and they had more people around to help. So I stepped back, thinking I was giving her space to find her footing. But the more I stepped back, the more they stepped in, until there wasn't any room left for me at all. I remember the first time I asked if I could stop by just to see the baby for a few minutes. My daughter hesitated. She said something like, "Let me check with everyone first," and her voice sounded small, unsure, almost nervous. "Everyone?" I remember asking. Not angrily, just confused. She didn't answer that part. Just told me she'd call me back. She didn't. Not until the next day. And when she did, she said it wasn't a good time. A few days later, it happened again. "Not today. Maybe this weekend. We're tired. The baby's fussy. His mom is here." Excuses that felt soft but painful, like someone pressing on a bruise that never had time to heal. I tried to hold on to hope. I'd bring groceries by, leave meals on the porch, drop off diapers, anything that might help. Sometimes I'd see his mother's car parked outside, and I'd know right away I wouldn't be invited in. She made me feel like I was interrupting something every time I showed up. Then came the misunderstanding, the small, stupid moment that became the excuse they used to push me all the way out. One evening, my daughter finally invited me to visit. I was so excited I barely slept the night before. When I got there, the baby was asleep on my daughter's chest. I sat beside her gently, whispering how beautiful the little girl was, telling her how proud I was of her. At one point, the baby fussed, and out of instinct, pure, harmless instinct, I reached out and touched her stomach, gently trying to soothe her. I didn't pick her up. I didn't rock her. I barely brushed my hand across her honestly. But his mother saw it, and she reacted like I'd done something dangerous. She stepped toward me and said sharply, "Don't touch her like that. She just ate." I froze. My daughter froze too. His father turned around from the kitchen, eyebrows raised like I'd committed some kind of crime. I tried to explain. I wasn't hurting her. I was just. His mother cut me off. "Newborns have sensitive stomachs. You could make her sick." My daughter looked torn, embarrassed, confused. And instead of defending me, instead of reminding her mother-in-law that I'd raised a child alone, she said nothing. The room grew cold. Silent. Uncomfortable. I felt like a stranger in a place where I should have felt at home. And before I knew it, I made the mistake of standing up too quickly, trying to brush it off, trying to leave without making things worse. I said, "I'll come back when things aren't so tense. Maybe another day." But those words, that quick escape, were twisted into something else. Something bigger. Something they used like a weapon. The next time I called, my daughter's voice was tight. "Dad, maybe you should give us some space." Space. From what? From loving my grandchild. From wanting to help. From existing. His mother must have been in the background. I could hear her whisper something. My daughter sighed, swallowed hard, and repeated the same line she had just said, like she was reading from a script someone handed her. Less than a week passed before my number stopped being answered. Texts left on read. Calls going straight to voicemail. Door unopened when I knocked. All because of one tiny moment. One harmless touch. One simple misunderstanding that gave them exactly what they needed. A reason to push me out completely. I never imagined the first hands that held my granddaughter would later be the hands that blocked me from seeing her. But that's exactly what happened. And as the days stretched into weeks, and the silence grew heavier, I realized something painful. That baby had brought life into the world. But for me, her birth became the start of the darkest, loneliest chapter I'd faced since raising her mother alone. I'll never forget the day I walked up to their house with a small bag of baby toys in my hand, feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. I had spent the night before wrapping each little thing with care, imagining the way my granddaughter might reach out for them, imagining the soft smile my daughter used to give me when I surprised her as a child. I kept telling myself that things would get better, that misunderstandings fade, that love finds its way back if you give it enough time. The sun was warm that morning, the kind of light that makes you believe life can still turn around. I remember standing on their porch, adjusting my jacket, taking a deep breath, and knocking gently, because I didn't want to startle the baby if she was asleep. I waited, and waited, but no one came. I knocked again, this time a little louder. Through the window, I could see movement, shadows crossing the hallway, the faint outline of someone looking through the peephole. For a moment, I felt relief wash over me. They were home. They were here. This was finally the moment we would clear the air. But then the door opened the smallest crack. Just enough for someone to speak through. It was his mother. She didn't step outside. She didn't smile. She didn't open the door wider like she used to when greeting neighbors or friends. She kept her hand firmly on it like she was holding something in place. "Oh," she said softly, "you should have called first." I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. I did. Several times. No one answered. She nodded in that polite way she had mastered. "Yes, well, it's been a busy week. The baby's schedule is very delicate right now." "I understand," I said. "I just came by to see them. To see my granddaughter. I won't stay long." Her expression shifted, just a little. A pinched look around the eyes. The sort of look people give when they're searching for the gentlest way to say something harsh. "I'm afraid today isn't a good day," she said. My heart sank. "But I'm already here," I whispered. "It'll only take a moment." She opened the door just enough for her body to fill the space, blocking the inside of the house. I caught a glimpse behind her, my daughter standing in the hallway, holding the baby. She wasn't close enough to the door to speak. She wasn't far enough to pretend she didn't hear us. She just stood there, frozen, uncertain, avoiding my eyes. His mother cleared her throat. "We think it's best to give them some space for now." "We?" I said quietly. She nodded. "Your daughter needs consistency. She feels overwhelmed. Your reactions have been a little intense lately." Reactions. Intense. Overwhelmed. Words that landed like small blades under my ribs. I opened my mouth to speak, but what came out wasn't anger. It was confusion. What did I do? What exactly did I do wrong? She gave a soft, practiced sigh. "It's not one thing. It's everything. The tension. The atmosphere. The stress. Newborns need calm, stable environments. And you think I don't give them that?" She didn't answer. She simply tightened her hand on the door frame and said, "I think it's best if you go home for now." Behind her, my daughter finally looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't say a word. She didn't defend me. She didn't reach out. She didn't step forward. She just held her baby close to her chest like she was afraid the moment would break her in half. I took a step back because I suddenly couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak, like they'd forgotten how to hold me up. I whispered, "Honey, can I at least see her? Just for a second." My daughter's lips parted. For a moment, it looked like she might speak. But his mother spoke first. "Not today." The door closed. Gently. Quietly. Firmly. The kind of close that doesn't slam, but makes a sound you feel more than hear. A sound that tells you a chapter has ended without you agreeing to it. I stood there on the porch, holding that little bag of toys, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't trust myself to do anything except stand there until my legs stopped trembling. Eventually, I walked to my truck. But instead of turning the engine on, I sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I stared at their front door through my windshield, hoping, just hoping, that someone would come out and call my name. No one did. Over the next few days, I called my daughter's phone. I texted gently, carefully. Nothing. No reply. Each unanswered message made my chest tighten a little more. I left voicemails saying I wasn't mad, I wasn't upset, I just wanted to see them. I told her I loved her. I told her I missed her. I told her I'd do anything she needed. Silence. Then the whispers started. From mutual acquaintances. From neighbors. From people who had no business knowing things they shouldn't. Did you hear? They are saying he's unstable. He gets too emotional. Makes them uncomfortable. They don't want the baby around that energy. My energy. The same energy that raised my daughter through poverty and long nights and impossible odds. The same energy that fed her, dressed her, taught her, loved her with everything I had. It hurt in a way I didn't know how to describe. Weeks passed. I drove by the house sometimes at night, parking at the end of the street so I wouldn't be seen. I'd look at the lit windows, wondering if my granddaughter was awake, wondering if my daughter ever thought about me, wondering if there was some truth buried under all those accusations. Was I unstable? Was I emotional? Was the love I carried too heavy for them to hold? Some nights, I'd sit in the dark living room staring at the pictures on the wall, my daughter at 6, at 12, at 16. Me holding her at her graduation. Her laughing in the backyard when she was small. I'd touch the frames and feel everything I'd kept bottled up start to rise. I had spent my entire life proving people wrong about me. Proving I was good enough. Proving I could be a father. Proving I could raise a child alone. Proving I wasn't going to walk away. But now I had no way to prove anything. No way to defend myself. No way to show them the truth. I was locked out. Not by a mistake. Not by a misunderstanding. But by a slow, intentional removal that had been growing ever since my daughter stepped into that new family. One night, after weeks of silence, I sat in my kitchen long after midnight. The house was dark except for the dim light above the stove. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands were shaking so hard I had to hold the glass with both hands. And that's when the truth finally struck me. I couldn't fight them. Not like this. Not in the way I wanted. Not in a way that wouldn't destroy my daughter further. The more I pushed, the more she would retreat. The more I argued, the more they'd twist it into proof that I was exactly the man they claimed I was. The more I showed up, the more they'd say I didn't understand boundaries. So in that dark, quiet kitchen, with the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the room, I realized something painful and heavy. Sometimes loving someone means stepping back, even when stepping back feels like dying. And stepping back wasn't surrendering. It was the only way left to protect the small space of love I still had. Because if I kept fighting, I risked losing her forever. I didn't decide to step back all at once. It wasn't a clean, sharp choice. It was more like the slow unwinding of a rope I had been pulling on for too many years. The quiet realization that sometimes the only way to keep love alive is to loosen your grip before it breaks in your hands. After that night in my kitchen, sitting alone with the weight of everything on my shoulders, I understood that fighting harder wasn't going to bring me closer to my daughter or my granddaughter. It would only push them further away. And I had already lost too many pieces of myself trying to chase a place in their world that kept shrinking every time I reached for it. So I did the hardest thing a parent can do. I let silence be silence. I let space be space. I let life move without me for a while. At first, stepping back felt like punishment. Every morning I woke up expecting a text that wasn't there. Every afternoon I checked my phone more times than I admitted. Every night I sat in my living room staring at the empty chair across from me, imagining my granddaughter someday sitting there, kicking her legs while I told her stories about her mother when she was little. But that chair stayed empty, and life kept reminding me that waiting for what isn't being offered is another way to break your own heart. So I began filling my days with things I used to love but abandoned along the way. Small things at first. Walks around the neighborhood. Drives through the back roads where the cornfields stretched so far they touched the horizon. I pulled my old fishing gear out of the storage closet even though I hadn't used it in years. One quiet Saturday morning, I found myself sitting by the lake, the same one I used to bring my daughter to when she was barely old enough to hold a fishing pole. I cast a line out into the water and watched the ripples spread, one after another, like the echoes of a life I once lived. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle inside me. Not joy. Not peace exactly. Just space. Room to breathe. The next week, I found an old notebook shoved in the back of a drawer. The cover was faded, the pages stiff. But as soon as I held it, a strange thought came over me, one that felt so natural, so obvious, I couldn't believe it hadn't occurred to me sooner. If I couldn't be part of my granddaughter's life right now, maybe I could leave something for her to find in the future. Something she could hold in her hands. Something that would speak for me when I wasn't there to speak for myself. So I sat down at my kitchen table, opened the notebook, and began writing. I didn't write about the pain. I didn't write about the fights or the silence or the way his family pushed me out. Instead, I wrote about her mother as a child, the first time she called me daddy, the way she looked when she fell asleep in the backseat after long days at the county fair, the nights we sat on the porch counting fireflies. I wrote about the time she tried to bake me a birthday cake and filled the kitchen with so much flour it looked like winter inside the house. I wrote the stories her mother may never tell her, the parts of her childhood that belonged only to us. Page after page, memory after memory, I poured a lifetime of love into that little notebook. And when I finished it, I started another. Then another. Sometimes I wrote for hours. Sometimes only a few lines. Some days I wrote through tears, other days with a soft smile on my face. But every word felt like stitching myself back together, one memory at a time. I bought a wooden box, a simple one, something sturdy. I filled it with the notebooks, a few pictures, and a silver pendant that had belonged to my grandmother. On the inside of the lid, I carved a small message with a pocket knife. When you're ready, I'm here. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was a promise. A quiet one. A patient one. As months passed, the ache in my chest softened. I stopped checking my phone every hour. I stopped replaying old conversations in my mind. I stopped asking myself what I did wrong and started asking myself what I could build next. I started volunteering at the community center on weekdays. The kids there reminded me of my daughter in small, innocent ways. Wide eyes, loud laughs, endless questions. It felt good to be useful. To be needed without having to prove anything. Some afternoons I'd read to them, and they'd sit cross-legged on the floor, listening like every word mattered. And maybe it did. I joined a small woodworking group at the local library. Old men, mostly. Men my age who also carried regrets in their pockets. We talked about nothing and everything. Wives we'd lost, children who'd grown cold. The strange loneliness that sneaks up on you when you reach a certain age. I found comfort there, knowing I wasn't the only one trying to rebuild something inside himself. Seasons changed. Leaves fell. Snow came. Spring returned. And somewhere in all of that, I slowly stopped feeling like a man waiting for the door to open. I became a man building a life again. And that's when it hit me. This quiet way of choosing myself, of stepping back without bitterness, was its own kind of revenge. Not the spiteful kind. Not the burning kind. But the kind that says, you didn't break me. You don't get to define me. You may erase me from your world, but you won't erase me from hers. Because someday, whether it's 10 years from now or 20, my granddaughter will grow curious. She'll ask questions. She'll wonder who I was. She'll hear pieces of conversations, see gaps in stories, feel the missing shape where a grandfather should have been. And when that day comes, maybe she'll come searching. Maybe she'll knock on my door with the same soft uncertainty her mother once had. Or maybe she'll find that wooden box. Those notebooks. Those memories I saved for her. And she'll know the truth. Not the one whispered by others, but the one written by my own hand. She'll know I loved her before she was even born. She'll know I fought for a place in her life even when I wasn't allowed through the door. She'll know I stepped back, not because I stopped caring, but because I cared too much to make her life harder. And she'll know that I lived. Not bitter, not broken, but whole again. These days, when I sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sun sink behind the trees, I still think of her. I still picture her first steps, her first words, the way her laugh might sound. But the ache isn't sharp anymore. It's soft, warm, like remembering something precious that you keep safe inside you. And maybe that's what acceptance really is, not forgetting the pain, but holding it gently until it stops hurting quite so much. If you're listening to this, wherever you are, know that the story isn't finished. Life has a strange way of bringing things back around when you least expect it. Maybe someday she'll find me. Maybe she won't. But either way, I built a life worth living again. A life she can step into whenever she's ready. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below. even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.